Johnson and Chuka Umunna. Well, this morning, the body which represents thousands of British businesses, the CBI, threw its weight behind the Remain campaign. And the CBI's Director General, Carolyn Fairbairn, joins me now. Welcome.
Hello.
You gave an interview back in November when you took over as Director General, when you backed Britain remaining in a reformed EU. Yet today we find out you won't be aligning officially to the Remain side, so you won't be able to campaign with them. Why the change of heart?
Well, I think we have got a very clear mandate from our members now. We've been consulting and surveying over the last 3 weeks, and we now know that our members employ 7 million people across the UK, and they have given us a resounding voice that 8 out of 10 support remaining in the European Union. We, however, don't think that economics, and economics is a very important part of it, prosperity and growth. It's not the only issue. We think that there are broader issues, but we are going to be making the economic case on their behalf for remaining in the European Union.
But as you say, 80% of your members have backed staying in the EU. Won't it be seen as fence-sitting in this instance if you don't officially align yourself to campaign?
I really don't think so. We're not a political organisation. We never have been. But we are very strong in the voice that we have for prosperity, growth, employment, and the general health of the economy. And that's the voice we want to have. It's going to be about informing the debate so that when people go to the polls on June the 23rd, they understand the implications for jobs and growth in the future of the economy.
But you won't be allowed to spend more than £10,000 during the 6 weeks leading up to June the 23rd. So you're going to be limited in outlining the arguments that you want to present. And if it's so important, why are you sitting on your hands?
Well, between now and April the 15th, we can do whatever we like, and we will be making the case very strongly. I think you will see that.
And then not after that?
Well, the kind of things. It's worth stepping back and thinking about the kind of things that the CBI does. We speak out. We talk on platforms. We write. All of those things we can still do, and we will continue to do. And we've been in discussions with the Electoral Commission about how we do that. The important point here is that we have a resounding voice from our members in terms of staying in the European Union, and we will be making that case.
Were you scarred by your experience in the Scottish independence referendum?
This is about making a case that is the case that our members would like us to make around jobs and prosperity and growth. It isn't about making a political statement. So I think that the position that we have is an extremely sort of clear and simple one.
Are you breathing a sigh of relief that a powerful, influential organisation with so much support from businesses who want to remain in are not going to politically align themselves?
Well, not necessarily, because, when I was a junior barrister, we had to prepare cases on a regular basis that required expert witnesses. And when you had an expert witness, you had to have an expert that was actually generally right on the issues that we talked about. So when you look at the CBI, they were wrong on the ERM, they got it massively wrong. They were wrong on the euro, and even almost 100 years ago, they were wrong on the gold standard. So if I was trying to present them as a case before a judge, they would actually throw out the fact that on almost every major political and economic issue in the last 100 years which they've espoused a view, they've been wrong. But one other point, they would also be asked whether they have a conflict of interest in this particular case. And it is right, and I'm sure that Caroline would say, that they have received over £800,000 from the European Union, whether it's for research or other ways, so that would also be regarded as a conflict of interest. So I think the British public will say to themselves, when the CBI speaks, they've been wrong before, they're wrong now, and they have a conflict of interest.
What do you say?
Well, I come back on both of those. I mean, on the issue of conflict of interest, there is absolutely none. We provide a commercial service to a small part of the European Union, less than 0.5% of our revenue. It's an absolutely ludicrous claim to say we have a conflict of interest. And in terms of the position, the euro was a very, very different question.
The euro?
A very, very different question. What we're facing now is an issue of we've enjoyed a period of real prosperity as part of the European Union. And what many businesses up and down the land are saying is that they can prosper within the European Union. They want it to reform further, but they can prosper. And actually the prospect of uncertainty that will come from triggering Article 50 and not knowing what the alternative is just too great.
You say this is a very different case to that of the euro, but the arguments that you're using are identical. You're using the fear-mongering arguments of the euro, that if we didn't take on the euro, then Britain would actually fall into a mire and never be successful in the future. You'd actually be saying that business wouldn't be able to trade with the European Union. We'd have no access to these markets, notwithstanding that the single market comprises two distinct elements. First of all is the free trade element under the customs union, which only Belarus and Russia is not part of, from the non-EU Iceland to the non-EU Turkey. Are you saying we'd be excluded that alongside Russia? And then you have the single regulatory regime, which we have very little influence over at the moment. So those arguments are identical to that of the euro. They're just being replicated today.
I don't accept that at all. What the European Union gives at the moment is a guarantee of totally tariff-free access to 500 million consumers. And the moment that Article 50 is triggered, that guarantee goes. We can't even go back and say, actually, we've changed our mind, we'd like to go back
That's
on
right.
that.
Article 50 says for 2 years we're okay.
Steve, I just want to ask you, though, because when you say that the CBI have been wrong on issues and you cite the euro, what about the figures from the poll, just looking at the views of business? It's always the case that people who want to leave the EU say small businesses support that and bigger business support staying in the EU broadly. But the figures are quite damning, aren't they, in the poll? I mean, just 6% of firms in the CBI survey think leaving the EU would be in the best interest of the UK economy as a whole. Why do so few businesses, of the ones that were polled, back Brexit?
Well, that's not necessarily the case. I've seen quite a few, and you've actually had many on the show here that actually show that they support leaving the European Union. But actually looking at the analysis of those figures are quite interesting. Over 95% of the businesses in the UK are businesses less than 50 people. But if you look at 73% of this poll, that they consist of businesses over 250 people, which is 0.1% of the business community.
But why do they not back Brexit?
Well, it comes down to the arguments that they hear from government affairs officials.
Really? They don't know their own minds?
From lobbyists who keep telling them, as I heard when I was working in investment banks, or indeed when I was chairing the Hedge Fund Lawyers Association, that these companies would not be able to trade. We'd have tariffs imposed upon us. Well, none of this is the case. I saw it before as a lawyer advising companies. I was often in conflict to those lobbyists who have a financial interest enjoying their time going to Europe than those like the CFOs and ourselves as lawyers who actually had to deal with the issues and the regulations that compounded the business cost.
Does your poll fairly reflect the businesses that are in the UK in terms of views towards the EU?
Absolutely, and I think what you will see is, and I know this to be true, that not one single business survey of any size of business, even the very smallest...
Of any size of business?
Of any size of business, even the FSB survey, not one has a majority in favour of leaving.
But you've never explained how you actually have any influence. For example...
Well, hang on a second, let's stick with that point and then I'll come back on that. But are you then saying that small businesses, those with that employ under 50 people, of which there are hundreds of thousands, are overwhelmingly supportive of staying in the EU?
That not one survey has showed that there's a majority in favour of leaving. And just to give you an example, I mean, there are many small businesses now that are born global. They immediately want to be able to trade, and they immediately want to be able to have access to the single market. So, I think we are talking about a small business environment here, where many of them actually hugely value, again, that tariff-free access.
When I was a private equity lawyer, and someone who wanted to invest in housing in Poland, it didn't stop them doing that. If they wanted to invest in housing in the United States, trade was still going on, even though they weren't in a common market with the United States.
All right.
When I was looking at small internet businesses, exactly the same. Trade continues, irrespective of the countries or the rules. All you're concerned about is whether there would be tariffs, of which I argue would be none, and whether we actually have influence on the regulations, which I say, again, we have very limited, if any at all.
And on that, Carolyn Fairbairn, thank you very much.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.